Welcome to the Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver podcast. We're happy you're here. On the podcast, we're certain that you'll relate to the caregiver stories and find comfort with your honorary sisters. Now, before we start, I want to remind you to go to our website, confessionsofareluctantcaregiver.com, and sign up for our newsletter. It's full of useful information that you can immediately use. Now, let's learn more about today's guest. Hey, good morning, Jay.
Good morning, Natalie.
You know, there's nothing better than to record on a Friday because it goes right into the weekend and you go feeling so good.
It's true. Although Friday, I required your singing first thing in the morning. So
I'm sorry. Did you want me to sing?
No, don't do that. Don't do that to our listeners. Okay.
I didn't think so. Hey, you know what? We have an amazing guest today. I am so excited about.
Yes, we do. And you did sing for him. So I am sure that he is traumatized, but we'll just move forward with that.
I'm recovering quickly. It's okay.
Oh, look at Barry. He's resilient. I think this whole story is going to be about resilience.
I know. So I'll tell you a little bit about Barry. So today we have Barry Jacobs with us. Thankfully, he is a clinical psychologist, so he will be able to recover from Natalie's singing.
He's going to diagnose me.
I know. So Barry is a clinical psychologist, a family therapist, and a principal for a national healthcare consulting firm. He is a writer and a blogger, and his caregiving resources through AARP and multiple books, including Meditations for Caregivers and The Emotional Survival Guide for Caregivers, speaks to his experience both professionally and personally. And I have to say, his articles are fantastic. You will find them a lot of times shared on the sisters' social media, so keep your eyes open for that.
Mm-hmm.
Barry is a caregiver, though, and he says his first experience at 14, caring for his father, led him to spend his career trying to help other families do a better job managing caregiving than his own family did. He and his wife then cared for elderly parents. And again, he says he learned how families struggle to pull together during challenging times. Barry, we are so happy that you are here.
Oh my gosh.
Challenging times. We are ready to learn. We are ready to get. I'm ready to hear his confession.
I will say this before we start, though, Barry. Yes. Your articles are so good, and you can find them on LinkedIn. We share them on our pages. They're so good, and I know normally we'd say that at the end, but I've gotten so much from them, and they're brief, so they just give me a little teeny bit. They give me enough information. There's a couple of takeaways. So I just really want to thank you for writing, because that's a gift, and that's something I know that you share with others, and I love that. So, Barry, thank you for coming on with us.
Well, I really appreciate you having me, and thank you so much for the kind words about my articles. That's a labor of love. It means a lot to me to do that. It means a lot to me to get this kind of feedback. So thank you.
Yeah, we love it.
So you said at 14, Natalie and I always say, okay, you were born and then. So at 14, you really started caregiving. And I want you to tell us a little bit about that, because that you say that started your path because you saw that you wanted things to be done better. So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure, JJ. So my dad was a lawyer. He was a litigator, means he would stand in front of the courtroom and speak eloquently and try to convince a jury. My mom was a homemaker, caring for me, the oldest son, and then my younger brother, who's 3 years younger than me. And then one day we had some friends over. This is when I was around 14, and we were watching TV, and my dad turned to speak to the neighbor, and out of his mouth came a kind of gibberish. There were words, but they didn't make sense. They were what we would call a word salad in psychology. They had pieces of different words that were linked together, but it was impossible to understand what he was trying to say.
Yeah.
And then he stopped himself, and then he tried to speak again, and the same thing happened. What was happening at that moment was he had a brain cancer growing that we were unaware of. He was unaware of until it invaded the language portion of his brain, which is in the left frontal temporal lobe, if you want to know this specifically. But that was the start of a really difficult time in my family's life. I mean, my dad went from being fully functional to being what we call aphasic. He couldn't use language anymore, which meant he couldn't be a lawyer, argue in court anymore. And then, so he is suddenly home all the time now. My mother has to go to work and work 2 jobs to try to compensate for my father's lost income.
Wow. Oh.
My grandparents, my father's parents, are coming over every day to sit with him while I'm at school and my brother's at school. And then when we come home from school, my grandparents leave. My brother and I are with my dad until my mom comes home from work. But that was a really tough time. I mean, we're talking about, I'm an old guy. So when I was 14, is a long time ago.
Right.
People didn't say the word cancer. People didn't even like to use the word big C. I mean, cancer was a death sentence then. It's not so now, thankfully.
Right.
But unfortunately, over the course of the year, my dad got sicker and sicker. He lost ability to see, lost his ability to walk. I mean, he lost, as the cancer spread, he really lost a lot of functioning. And unfortunately, what happened in my family was my mother and my father's mother, my grandmother, who had always been, I would say, rivals in a way for my dad's affection. My grandmother was a very domineering, strong-willed woman who really saw my father as her son, not my mother's husband.
Yeah.
And my mother and my grandmother fought about everything they could possibly fight about. So they fought about where my dad would get medical treatment and what treatments he had. My grandmother read about an experimental treatment for brain cancer out in California and wanted my mom to move the family out there to give my father the best chance of surviving. But my mom, like all of us, had multiple family roles. She was, a wife, but she was also a mother to her own parents who lived not that far away, and had 2 sons who she didn't want to, take out of their schools and away from their friends. So my mother said no, and my grandmother never forgave her. And when my father died about a year after he first showed symptoms, my grandmother blamed her for my father's death. And then my grandmother and mother saw each other at my dad's funeral and then did not have any contact whatsoever until the day of my own wedding, about 19 yeyears later,
Wow.
17 years later, where they were in the same room for the first time in many years.
Wow.
So what happened is my family fell apart. It was really, really tough dealing with my father's cancer. We had a lot of financial hardship because we lost my dad's income, and my mother was not able to compensate for that, at least right away. But I also lost a lot of my contact with my father's family, my father's parents. Not that I stopped seeing them. I didn't. I continued to see them, but I would go to their home, and my grandmother would be very apt to badmouth my mother.
Oh man!
So it was a kind of schism in a family that you hear about. I mean, it's not that unusual. The family members don't talk to one another for decades, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But as a 14 and 15-year-old, when my dad died, it really compounded the suffering. And that went on. It was really a long time before my family kind of recovered, and I went on with my life. I went off to college, etc. But it was basically the way families shouldn't handle a serious life-threatening illness. I mean, what we hope is that family members will pull together and really rally around the person who's sick and care for one another, because we can't always save the person who's sick, but we can care for one another and we can go here as a family. And that didn't happen in my family's case. And so I didn't wake up at 15 and say, I'm going to be a psychologist, spending the rest of my life helping family caregivers. It took me a long time to get to that point, but it planted a seed, which eventually led me to a place where I really want families to do better than my own family did. When I work with families, I'm very sensitive to this idea that people, everybody feels very emotional. Everybody feels very passionately about what's supposed to happen. And that's great. It's just that they have to pull together. Otherwise, if they pull apart, it really does make the situation fall worse. So, I became a psychologist. I have spent 30 plus years in various, mostly medical settings, working with families with all kinds of illnesses, certainly dementia, Parkinson's disease, MS, stroke, cancer, chronic pain, you name it. Worked with hundreds of families. Yeah. I've seen, families are fascinating to me to see how they react to this kind of crisis in their lives. some really rise to the occasion in ways that are absolutely inspiring, and others unfortunately falter and go through the sort of thing that my family went through.
Number one, I always ask about birth order. So Barry, I knew that you and I are best friends for a reason, because I am the middle child as well. And I see that
I'm the oldest. I'm the oldest.
The oldest.
Excuse
Darn
me.
it.
Sorry, I am so sorry.
Darn it. I thought you said you had an older brother, and I thought we were immediately aligned.
No, Barry and I are aligned.
No, I ruled the roost. My brother is still very sensitive.
Oh, thank you. So then your brother and I clearly aligned, because if you say your brother is very sensitive to that, trust me, I get it. I can relate. So you're the oldest. And so let me ask you this. This was before your dad got sick. Would you say that things were okay, normal, kind of whatever? And then you have this stress, because I heard you say, number one, I heard you say a lot in the sense of like, your mom was a caregiver for many people. She was a caregiver for you and your brothers. She was a caregiver for her mother. Then she's a caregiver for your dad. And then she has this new added pressure of, oh gosh, I've been a homemaker the whole time, and I'm a woman. Going back, and this is back when, women were typically in the home being homemakers, and she's now entered this world. I could see, I can empathize with that. Like, she's got so many things she's juggling. Oh, and then she's got a mother-in-law who believes in her own opinion, as JJ and I like to say, because we're like, oh, we believe in our own opinion too. And she's pushing on her. So how is all this, I'm going to say chaos, because it feels like chaos. You know what I mean? And the sense of like caregiving, when you're in a crisis, like you've got this going on and you've got so many things going. How does this affect your relationship with your siblings, you and your brothers? And how does it affect your relationship with your mom? Because you're the oldest, and are you now becoming the man of the house in that sense? Because we know a lot of kids, when there's an issue with a parental figure, they take on a role.
So what happened at that time with me and my mom is that she, as you say, she invested a lot of authority in me. So my mom did several things. I mean, she was working as a bookkeeper during the day, and then my mom was a real smart lady, and she had a couple of master's degrees, and she was teaching accounting at a local university at night. Wow! So she was.
But you said she was a homemaker, and she's got several master's degrees.
Yeah, my mom, my dad was an old-fashioned guy, so my mom was in law school at the time.
Oh, totally normal.
And my dad actually asked my mom to drop out of law school, and she did. But my mom was someone who had a lot of skills and a lot of smarts, and so it wasn't easy for her to re-enter the workforce. Yeah, and work was essentially a job and a half. And then, the other thing that was happening is, my mom was 45 years old when my dad died, and we were financially strapped. And 45, when I was 15, I thought it was ancient, but man, it is not ancient, right?
No, no, we're all like, all of us are like, no.
Yes. So my mom went out. I mean, my mom pretty early on went out and started dating. So she'd work one job, she'd work a second job, and then she'd be out on dates. And so I mean, there was probably a 2 or 3 year period there where I really barely saw her. And I was giving my brother dinner every night. I was just watching out for him, making sure. I mean, my brother's only 3 years younger than me, and he didn't really like me having authority over him. He still doesn't. I mean, I was responsible for him, and I was responsible for myself as well. And so, just as you say, Natalie, there was, I was given responsibility kind of beyond my years. Most teenagers will rise to the occasion when needed, but in retrospect, I did a lot of things wrong. And I was having my own struggles adjusting to all this.
Yeah.
My mom was doing what she needed to do to keep the family going financially, emotionally, not so well.
Yeah.
So,
understood.
And then just to kind of end this part of my life, 2 years after my father dies, my mother comes home and says, I'm getting married. And to a guy I had met exactly one time before. Yeah. And then, then my life goes off in a different direction, because now I have a stepfather coming in, and the family really changed. But my mom was, to her credit, she was a survivor. She did what she thought she needed to do to help the family survive. but there was a lot of change over a very short time in my family.
Wow.
I mean, that in itself is so much. Go ahead, Jay. I'm sorry.
So I will, just speaking from us, because, our father passed, at 58. And so I can't quite imagine that. I know our mom, she had a friend, and the friend really threw us off. We were like, what is this? They were married for 40 years. Our parents were. So we were like, no, you can't have any male friends.
We don't want any friends. We have enough.
Yeah, no. Well, we don't want you to have any friends, Mom.
No.
You should be alone. We don't, that's disrespectful. So I can't imagine at that age how that would be that for me, that would be a really big problem, Barry. So you go, so she gets, how old are you when she gets married?
My father dies at 15. She gets married when I'm 17. Remarried at 17.
Well, and especially, Jay, it's a total different dynamic. I'm like, oh my God, Barry. And then what happened? But it's a different dynamic, especially if you're a male and you've taken a male role, because we were adults when our dad died, and right. You're an adolescent, and you've been put in this kind of authority figure, and so you're in charge. JJ was in charge because our mom and dad worked when we were young. They were young when they got married, and they worked, and so typically JJ was in charge. That's why JJ's naturally in charge, and I have no issue with that. I'm just used to it because it was like mom and dad were working. JJ's in charge. Standard answer. I think it just comes out of my mouth naturally, but I could see that as a male, especially when you're having so much responsibility, how that would be interesting. So as we're moving on, we have stepdad go in, but you're getting close to 18 and graduating. And so did you have any problems in school and maintaining in school? This is just because this is a lot of this caregiving kind of piece. This is like how it impacted you during, and then the after effects of your dad passing and how the family responded to such a kind of a crisis. And did it have any impact on your school? I mean, evidently not, because you're a psychologist.
Well, so I'm going to say something kind of strange. As you were alluding, it didn't. I worked, academically, I did fine. I did really, really well.
Uh-huh.
And I went off to a really good college. But, again, in hindsight, I wish it hadn't done well. I wish that I had, in some ways, I did a lot of stuff that I shouldn't have done behind my mother's back. Because I didn't have any authority. I was, there were times that I was out all night. My mother would be away for the weekend. I was supposed to take care of my brother, and that was free reign. I had parties at the house. I was out in places I shouldn't have been. But the fact is, I just kind of kept it together, and consequently, none of what I was experiencing as a teenager kind of came to the fore. Couldn't really talk with my mom about my feelings. Besides which, the message was, we're strong. We're just going to go through this. No one's going to talk about it. We're just going to deal with it. And that was the way my mom modeled it for me. That's the way I approached this. I didn't start talking about my father's death for another 10 years until I was in my mid-20s.
Yeah.
But if I had gotten in more trouble, if I had my grades had dropped, if I had gotten arrested for some of the things that I did, then it would brought to the fore that there was an issue here, and my mother and the family had to deal with it. Yeah. But I did just enough to do well, and then it was, the reckoning was, years later on things that had happened when I was 14, 15, 16, 17. I have to kind of contend with. I found myself in therapy with depression in my 20s. And not really understanding why I was depressed. I'm supposed to have it all together, but because it was this big hole in my heart, truthfully, for the things that had happened.
It's really like a ripple effect of caregiving, and of when someone needs care and how it affects the family unit. This is really, there's so much psychology built into caregiving if you think about it, because it's dynamics. We're humans. We're talking about humans. So you go to school. Did you stay local or did you go away?
I went away maybe about a 3-hour ride. So it wasn't
far enough away, but close enough.
Exactly.
Trust me. Get that. JJ and I went to Holland's 4 hours away. Close enough, just enough that your parents can't drop in on you. So then you're moving life. You decide to have life, right? And you get married, and do you have kids? Because I don't know if the answer to that.
Yeah, I do. I have 2 adult children. A daughter is 31, a son is 28.
Yeah. Okay. That's awesome. And so then, and you have a wonderful wife. What's your wife's name?
My wife's name is Julia Mayer, and she's also a psychologist. I met her in graduate school, and what I always say is that's the best thing that I got out of graduate school.
Hi, Julia.
That's good.
Julia.
That's good.
Yeah,
and she's also a writer, and she and I have co-written 2 books together, including the Meditations for Caregivers book that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, that's why you're still married, Barry, because you're so nice like that.
Yeah. Hi, Julia.
You know why I'm still married? Because, first of all, my wife is the most understanding person I've ever met. And secondly, I've learned a long time ago that she's right and I'm wrong. And I just better get used to it.
And that is the quote.
That is
for this
everyone's. You're right and I'm wrong. That's the part we should play, Jay.
Yeah, I know.
Go ahead.
So is your life, normal is a hard word, but life is, you have a family, it's normal. So tell me, I want to know a little bit about how that family dynamic, because your mom is in the picture, you have this stepdad. So during that time, life is going. And then I know that in your 50s, because we've moved along, but in your 50s, then you hit another caregiving episode. Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about the interim. You got a family. Is mom coming to birthday parties and your stepdad and all this stuff? How is that working?
Yeah, we would be what you would call a normal family. So, my mother and stepfather live. I live in the Philadelphia area. They were living in the New York area, so not real far, but far enough. But they were coming to parties. We were visiting them, and then my stepfather turns 65, decides to hell with work. He's going to retire, and that my mother and stepfather moved to Florida, South Florida, in a nice gated golf community, and my stepfather's playing golf 3 times a week because he's never been happier, and that's going along just fine. We're visiting maybe once or twice a year in Florida. And then my stepfather starts developing symptoms of Alzheimer's dementia. And it's very, as it is with the disease in general, it's a very slowly progressing disease. So initially, the memory issues, the word finding problems are not so severe that he can't continue working, or but over time he becomes more impaired, and my mother is doing more and more for him. And he's beginning to have such difficulties. He's having some what's called Parkinsonian symptoms. He's shuffling his feet. He looks like he has Parkinson's disease. He doesn't. It's related to the dementia. He's falling a lot. My mother, unrelated to that, has had her own kind of health issues, including very severe knee pain, had a knee replacement surgery, which didn't work out. And so she's trying to handle him physically as well as trying to calm him down when he gets upset. She's having a tough time. So in 2010, my wife actually made the suggestion. We moved him up from Florida to live in an apartment about a mile from our house in Pennsylvania. And then from 2010 to 2017, when my mom died, my wife and I are very involved in caring for them. And the focus of that initially is my stepfather, because at that point, he has very advanced dementia. And just, so to imagine, they live a mile away, which is, they're not living in my house, which is better for lots of reasons. My stepfather and I didn't get along very well. But there's also lots of steps in my house, and so he couldn't really get up and down the steps very easily. But a mile away means if he falls, I'm getting a phone call and I'm rushing over there and I'm going to pick him up. And it's just close enough that it's convenient, but it also means that I'm sort of on call all the time, and I'm going over to have dinner with him 3 nights a week. And I work very close to home. So, there are times when I got a call, it's in the middle of my day at work. I was working as a psychologist in a primary care office. And then, my mom says, my stepfather is very agitated. He's making all kinds of accusations. He's saying terrible things about me. Please come over and calm him down. So I leave work and go over, and unfortunately, another symptom of Alzheimer's disease is a lot of paranoia. My stepfather is saying, kind of ranting about all sorts of things about my mother did this and my mother did that, none of which is true.
Right.
And then, I show up, and my mother unfortunately takes every word my stepfather's saying to heart. It's like knives to the heart. My stepfather is accusing her of ruining his life, and it's like, it's like she's she can't see this as a manifestation of his disease.
Right.
She sees this as some sort of personal indictment. And so then I come over and I'm sitting with him and he's cursing at me, and we're going through this whole thing. And then what I learned with him was, if I could get him in front of the television, I could turn on the golf channel.
Oh.
That the scenes of these kind of rolling greens, in just the sunshine and these beautiful nature scenes, and these guys hitting golf balls, he would immediately calm down.
Wow.
So it didn't matter how all the terrible things he was saying. It was like suddenly that was like gone. He was completely immersed in this golf world.
Isn't that interesting?
And then I run back to work.
Yeah, I like that you're running in between work, because the thing is I think, and JJ experienced this a lot when mom lived in North Carolina, and JJ and mom were super tight. JJ was the oldest. Mom would need something and be like, Jay, come over here. And it was so convenient and so inconvenient at the same time, in the sense of mom wanted to come over all the time. And I don't say that disrespectfully, but JJ was trying to work. She had a job. And so you're one of the 60% of unpaid caregivers who work a full-time job, and you see clients. So you're in the middle of seeing clients or doing tests or things like that. And I'm assuming that became pretty disruptive for you.
It became disruptive in lots of ways. So, fortunately, I will say I had an immediate boss, and I had a health system that I was working for that were highly supportive, and that made a tremendous difference. And yes. I work with lots of caregivers whose employers are not so supportive, and people don't even want to tell their employers that they're a caregiver, because they're afraid that it's going to somehow be counted against them when it comes to promotions and raises and responsibility. So I didn't face any of that, but yes, it was very disruptive. I would. There were times, not only did I go over in the middle of the day, but I would be taking them to doctor's appointments all the time, and there were a lot of them, right? And I had in mind, like, I'm going to get them up really early this morning. We're going to jump in the car. We're going to speed over to the doctor's office. We're going to get through the appointment, home, drop them off. I'll go back to work.
Wrong. We're laughing at that because we've been there, and it goes you're thinking, I'm going to be here. Here's the thing. We'll go an hour before it's time to leave. Nope. And you're always rushing. Like, it's so fast in that sense.
Yeah. And what that's like that. It's first of all, it's like, I got to put the brakes on. I got to slow myself down. Got to go from fifth gear to first gear.
Yep.
And then my mother, no matter how patient I try to be, my mother is saying to me, you're rushing me. You're making me nervous. Leave me alone. Right. It's like, we've got to get going here.
Oh my God.
And then
so true.
So, P.S. best laid plans would never work. It would be like an all morning ordeal. Get them settled. Then I got to bring them home. I got to feed them lunch, or take them out to lunch. The whole thing is like, this is why it really is a consuming job, because
it is.
It just requires enormous time, enormous patience. I'm not patient. I didn't handle that part of caregiving real well, and unfortunately, because I would be even if I didn't say anything, just the fact that I'm kind of uptight, let's get going, please, right? And my mother would be very sensitive to whatever my facial expression was, how my whole body posture, and so she's bristling. She's I'm making all this harder for her. And so P.S. That was not something we worked out real well over time. I had it was a good lesson in humility for me. I couldn't shoehorn them into my day. Right, that was not happening. It had to be. If I was going to do this, I had to do it right, and that meant allowing them the time that they needed to get ready in the way that they felt they had to get ready. And my mother at that point had to get Steve, my stepfather, ready so that we could then go to the doctor's office. And in the doctor's office, my mother was a big social visitor, right? She receptionist.
She's using it as the time to make friends with everybody.
Right. Exactly. And then, I mean, that's great for her. And it's great for a lot of older people.
Right.
But it didn't fit with my priorities very well. So again, had to learn how to like take a deep breath, read the magazine and relax, not be like thumbing through the pages in the waiting room of the doctor's office, like with gripping the magazine, like what?
It's audible.
So long. So that was a part of caregiving. I mean, I had been focusing on caregivers for years since the 90s. I actually gave my first presentation on caregiving in 1988. Right.
Yeah.
Here it is, like 2010. I was like, I ought to know something. I didn't know some things, but this part about like, you better slow it down, buddy, that I didn't know. Right? That was a firsthand experience that helped me show my academic and clinical training was not complete to prepare me for what I was doing.
Hey ladies, I need to interrupt for just a second to share about the Sisterhood membership. It's basically a sale every day, and the best part, it's free. Here's the details. We're partnering with our friends at Benefit Hub and other care partners to save you money. With over 200,000 participating companies across the U.S. and abroad, you'll find discounts at your favorite local stores, huge savings on vacations, amazing deals on home, auto, and supplemental insurances, and everything in between. Go to confessionsofareluctantcaregiver.com to sign up, and then definitely tell your friends about it. They can join too. Trust me, there's a discount for everyone. And don't forget, it's free. Okay, back to confessing.
But there's family dynamics built in there too. Do you think that plays a big role, Barry? Because I know that's a role with me. I've got history with mom. Now, my facial expression, if you say that, my facial expression says it all. And I'm very similar. I'm like, let's go. And I don't even have to say that.
I've seen that look, Barry.
Yeah,
she does that to me and I hate
Barry.
it. She did it the other day.
It's the older sibling look. I know
it is.
It is. And because she did that to me and I'm like, what? And she's like, nothing. And I'm like, look at your eyebrows on camera. That hurts my feelings.
But do you think, because I know that family dynamics play a lot with my relationship. Do you think that history played a lot with the way that she reacted, but also the way you reacted?
I mean, for sure. So to your point, JJ, I mean, so my stepfather comes into my life at the age of 17, 17 and long hair, just a kind of 17-year-old full of myself and not and fairly rebellious. So he and I immediately clash right off the bat, and we don't really develop much of a relationship. And I don't like him; he doesn't like me, truthfully. And my mother is always sort of mediating between us, but she's very, very protective of him. So here too, in this part of the caregiving, when my stepfather is still in the apartment, my mother, I'm trying to push them along, and my mother is very protective of him. And so, and then that kind of brings up all kinds of feelings for me. And we're getting deep into my psychology here. But I mean, I was very resentful of my mom about the way she handled my father's death, and then how, frankly, she disappeared for a few years. Came home with a guy who I didn't barely know, and said, "This is your new this is your stepfather."
Ta-da! You've got a new dad.
Well, fortunately, she didn't say that, because I don't think.
Yeah, but I mean,
I would have tolerated that at that point. But she said, "I'm getting married. Here's my new husband."
Yeah,
so,
but that's different, Barry. You've been in charge.
Yeah,
I was in charge, but not well. I was not handling my responsibilities well. But it was also just feeling like my mother had, in her mind, and this is the truth, in her mind, she was marrying someone to make us more financially stable, so that my brother and I could go off to college the way she wanted us to go off to college and have the kind of lives that we wanted. So for this was all like her making sacrifices on our behalf. In my mind, it was my mother basically literally disappearing for a few years, and then coming home with someone that was going to be her new husband because she didn't want to be alone. And our feelings about this absolutely didn't matter. My mother just felt, I'm your mom. I say, this is your my new husband. You accept him, you deal with him.
Yeah.
And she felt entitled to that from us, even though I was very resentful.
Mm.
And so those are dynamics that never really got worked out very well in our relationship, unfortunately. And then I'll take my part of that. But to kind of skip to the end here of the caregiving, my stepfather winds up in a nursing home. I'm taking my mom up to the nursing home several times a week so she could visit him. But then my stepfather dies, and my mother develops her own dementia.
Mm.
And so, so the dynamics change again. The stepfather's out of the picture, and now it's, I'm taking care of my mom, and all those old feelings are kind of bubbling in the surface. And I'm trying to do a good job. I'm not only resentful of her, she's resentful of me for lots of things. We have we always had a fairly tense relationship. We have a very tense relationship while I'm now providing care for her.
Mm.
Because number one, she didn't want to have dementia, right?
Oh, no.
Right. Because as I said, she was a very smart and very capable person. Number two, she doesn't want anybody in charge of her life, and she doesn't want me in charge of her life, especially. And number three, she makes decisions to demonstrate her independence, particularly with money that were very it had adverse consequences for my wife and I.
Wow.
So that sounds like a very provocative statement, right? But basically, whatever money my mother had, which wasn't a lot at that point, she kind of hid from us, and so that she could spend it the way she wanted to spend it, while we were spending a lot of money on her to help feed her, to make sure eventually she help pay for some of her home health aides.
Yeah.
We took some financial responsibility for her. And then we find out later that she has this little nest egg that she had spirited with her up from Florida that she is not telling us about, and is not sharing that with us. But because this is like her way of maintaining some independence from being really dependent on us.
Yeah.
So I can understand. Again, nobody wants to have dementia. Nobody wants to be dependent, especially if like my mom, you've been a take charge lady.
Yeah.
Who's run businesses, she was always the head of the Parent Teachers Association while I was in elementary school, which was also a source of embarrassment for me, but that's something else.
Yeah.
But my mom was accustomed to having authority, and
she was in charge.
Exactly. And so, so she was looking for ways to not lose that sense of herself. And again, in hindsight, all this stuff. My mom died in 2017. I've had 6 years to kind of think through some of the difficult times we had, and it makes sense to me now. And I actually have greater empathy for her that she made some of the decisions that she made. But at the time, it felt like, and not just for me, but for my wife too, it felt like she was lying to us and betraying us, working very hard on her behalf, and for her, in her mind, for her self-preservation, she was working against us. She was not working with us.
Yeah.
I wonder how at this time, because I was going to ask one question, like, where's your younger brother in this? And then I want to talk about Julia, who is clearly meant to be our best friend. And so your wife. But where's your brother?
She has a halo over her head.
Yes, at this moment, I'm feeling she's very halo-ish because she brought your parents from Florida a mile away from you. And I'm not sure she disliked you or really loved you. Because long distance caregiving, we get that. Hi, 4 hours away from me, and JJ might as well be in Europe. So we get it. But where's your brother at in helping with caregiving for your stepfather and your mom?
Funny you should mention that, Natalie. My brother's coming to visit tonight. My brother lives about 500 miles away. And so we go through our own tough times, and this is years later, we're not as close as we were. So because what happened during caregiving damaged our relationship. But so here's what happens. I call, Julie and I decide we're moving my mother and my stepfather up from Florida. We're going to start taking provide them with help. And I call my brother up and say, we've decided to do this. I would really appreciate it if you would help out as well. And my brother says, I didn't ask for this. This is your decision to bring them up here. I would have left them in Florida. It wasn't me. And so this is on you. So he says, basically, I'm not helping. Wow. And that led to a really bad, and that didn't sit well with me, right?
Of course not.
Because this is his mom, and he has a better relationship with my stepfather than I do.
Okay.
But he's just basically saying, not me.
And it's not uncommon, Barry. I mean, I think that's not uncommon. But here's the thing. Like, even for me, I've social work background. I've been taking care of people. I am always about a right answer. I can crisis response immediately. But when it happens to you personally, it's like all the training leaves your brain. Like you're using a part of your brain that I don't even think's inside your body. And so through all, like what and your past experiences and all that kind of stuff, it, but that doesn't mean that you just willingly accept it. It's part of my own reluctance, to be honest with you. Like,
I mean, what you're saying, Natalie, is obviously true. And that is, I mean, I had a lot of professional training, I had a lot of professional experience in this area, but when it came down to dealing with it in my own life, I mean, I felt everything that everyone feels. I mean, I felt all the anger at my brother that many siblings feel towards other siblings who were not helping.
Yeah.
We didn't, we didn't talk very much after that for a while. I mean, we didn't stop talking entirely, but he knew I was angry at him. To his credit, I mean, took about a year, but he began to kind of come around and see that maybe the position he took was not really what he wanted to do. And so then he would come down, usually came down quarterly to then spend more time with my mom, help us out a little bit. Quarterly was, it's not a lot, but it's something. But that his initial reaction was kind of a jolt. It was like it was like a slap across the face. But there's dynamics there too. I mean, so it's the dynamics of the big brother and little brother.
Yep.
Brother, is always telling him what to do. I mean, particularly during those years after my father died, I was more bossy than probably most big brothers are to their little brothers. Yeah, JJ, I get it. All right. But he doesn't, he's very sensitive to my telling him what to do.
Yes. Inserting control back to you. Like, I'll show you.
Yeah. So now he's basically saying, you want me to do this, but I'm taking a stand here. I'm not going to do this. And so, I mean, again, in hindsight, I understand that it kind of makes sense that he doesn't want me to now tell him that he's a caregiver, whether he wants to be it or not. And the more I press him, the more he says, in so many words, to go jump in a lake. I mean, I'm not, you can't make me do this. And so we have the standoff, and but eventually he kind of gets past that reaction and starts helping more.
So like Natalie said, I think we would be remiss to talk about, because I know this is something that you've talked about marriage and caregiving. So tell us, Natalie's like, we need to be best friends with Julia, but tell us about the impact on your family and how your immediate family, your kids and Julia, and how you all survived this. Like, how did you make this different? What can families do? Because this is an ongoing experience for so many people who are caring for others, Barry. How do you, what is the takeaway for you? What happened with you all, and what did you learn from it?
So let me give you, obviously every family story is very complicated. I don't want to make this too complicated. I'll just kind of give you a little bit more information. So 6 months before we moved my mother and stepfather off with Steve, the 3 years prior to that, we had been taking care of her parents.
Oh.
So it was not the same kind of caregiving, because we were doing that more long distance. Her family was up in New York. She was going to New York every other weekend, spending the weekend taking care of them. That went on for a while. But we've already been discussing caring for her parents, caring for my parents. And my wife is, my wife is the smartest person I ever met, and she's also my best friend. And She understands me, and she understands my relationship with my mom and my stepfather. And she's also a very generous, caring person. So she is really my guide through this. I mean, at the beginning, when we first moved them up, I mean, they're having dinner with our family 3 or 4 times a week. And my kids were teenagers at that point, and they're not all that happy, right? It's not that they don't like grandma and grandpa, but
yeah, we're just teenagers, though,
Well, for sure, and they were teenagers, meaning that they didn't really spend all that much time with the grandparents, but they also didn't like that. Now my wife and I are spending a lot of time with them, and time that we're not as available to drive them places and do things for them. So, our kids are reacting. Frankly, my wife didn't want to spend that much time with my mother and stepfather, and neither did I.
The whole family agreed. We don't really want to be with them, so we can all agree.
But I sort of felt like, well, I'm supposed to do this, right?
Exactly.
They don't know anybody in Pennsylvania. They are, they're kind of malnourished. They weren't really eating real well before we brought them up, for a lot of reasons. And so when we're feeding them, we're kind of nurturing them. I sort of felt like we're supposed to do this, but it's just agonizing, frankly, to be picking them up, to be bringing them to the house, to be feeding them, to be bringing them back. It's like I'm tucking them in at night. I don't really want to do this much. And so my wife, one of the first things she basically is able to say to me is, you're being driven by guilt. And you don't have to do this much. There's no requirement that you have to feed them 4 nights a week, right? Or 3 nights a week. That you're making these rules for yourself, which are not based in anything. And hearing my wife say that was sort of like, okay.
She gave you permission.
Yeah, she gave me permission. And then we continued to see them often, but not 4 nights a week. And that was that helped. There were other times where interestingly, everyone in my family is very oppositional to me. I can't imagine why. My brother is oppositional. My mother is oppositional toward me. I can't say to my mom, let's go to this doctor on this day. No, she's going to tell me, no, we're not going to go there that day. We're going to go here. We're going to go to this another doctor another day. All right. But my wife has a different relationship with my mother, right? And to my, it's not even that they're that close, but there just isn't that there's not that history. So my wife could become the point person with my mom and basically say, Gene, could you do this for us? It would be easier for us if we did it this way. My mother would say, well, for you, Julia, I'll do it. Right? For that guy, my oldest son there, maybe not. But for you, Julia, I'll do it. So she becomes kind of the ambassador, working her diplomatic magic with my mother, which was a big help. In addition to just being somebody who would just talk with me about these things, be a sounding board, try to solve problems together. My wife was fantastic. And I mean, and to specifically answer your question, JD, your original question about marriage. I mean, a lot of marriages are weakened by the experience of having to care for a family member or an older adult. My marriage was strengthened. I mean, I came away from that I was just in awe of my wife that she can help me as much as she did. This went on. We're talking about a lot of years here, from 2010 to the time we brought them up from Florida to 2017 when my mom finally dies. This is really taking a big chunk out of our life. We're not able to go on vacation really very much, very far, because we never know when we get a phone call. There's many times we're out for dinner and we get a call and there's a problem and we got to leave dinner, and then, we're out to dinner with friends and we got to say, so sorry, we got to go over to my mom's apartment to take care of things. Happened many times. And my wife she has the patience. She has the lack of emotional reactivity that I lack. I get very excited and I can get uptight really fast. This is not her parents. She can kind of roll with it better and adapt better.
I'm going to tell you, we let this go. I'd let this go a lot longer because this is so good, Barry. I mean, this is just, there's so much insight in here. And I just have like 1,000 more questions, Jay. I feel like Barry needs to come back.
I know. Well,
I'm like, I'm having therapy. This is great.
Well, I know that's what I was going to say, Barry. It's like therapy. You're like therapy for us because there's something, and you said, Julia said it. So, but when she said you can't be driven by guilt for all that you do. And I think there's so many of us out there that's what drives us is it's guilt. And so I feel like I never do enough. And so to say that I've never really thought about it, don't be driven by guilt, because that's what drives me. There are no rules out there. And for some odd reason, I've made this set of rules that if I don't call every other day, or if I don't do this, I'm not meeting the requirement. And who set that requirement? I did. So,
I mean, I think we set those requirements because we have certain values, we have certain standards for ourselves. I think we do this in all, not just in caregiving. I think we do this in all parts of our lives. How we, what kind of friend we are, what kind of worker we are, what kind of spouse we are, what kind of parent we are. And those standards drive us. They help us aspire to being better. But the standards can sometimes be punishing if they're set too high. And 4 nights a week with my mother and stepfather, that felt punishing. Right? That was too much. But it was not something I could easily see, because again, I sort of felt like, I'm supposed to do this. Like, I've got to do this. I don't like doing this, but I must do this. And, my wife, as you say, Natalie, gave me permission, basically saying, there aren't any rules here. There's no standard here other than the one that you're setting. And then it's not like I just abandoned them at that point. I didn't, but I developed something that was just a little bit more balanced, because the time I was spending with them, and that our family wasn't spending time together, or I wasn't doing other things just with my wife, let alone for myself. Because that, of course, in the pecking order here, you care for the parents, and then you fit in everything after under that. But then caring for yourself is all the way at the bottom.
I didn't even add myself to the list. A lot of caregivers, I think, don't even think.
You're a far better person than me now. I feel really guilty now for having added myself to the list. But if you didn't add yourself to the list, then
I forgot. No, it's not even a halo. When I say I didn't add myself to the list of things that are important, like I didn't even think of what I should do for myself. All I could think of when I was caring for Jason was, I have to do this. I have to do this. I have all these things I have to do. And he is like, who's going to do this? And I mean, even from filling out a form that I have to submit for him now, it was, he's so anxious about it. Like, I got to get that done. And I'm like, I got you. I'll take care of you. And it's something that makes me feel good because I can do it. But to think of myself in caring for myself, it's when you're in the middle of it, like when you're so close, I think that's why your wife was such a blessing to you. When you're so close to it, you can't see it as well. There's all this other stuff. And somebody who's a little farther away can say, hey, let me just pull you back just a little so you can see a little bit clearer. It's like better one, better two.
Yeah, she would grab me right over here and just yank me. It worked out perfectly.
I wish people who were listening to this could see you just jank the back of his neck. That's great.
So, Natalie, I know that we're like, oh my gosh, we're out of time.
Oh my gosh.
I won't even, he's answered like so many of my hard questions, but I know that you have to ask your question.
There's one question in this, and then we're going to just wrap.
All right, let me sit up straight. I'm ready now.
Okay. Barry, favorite question. What is your favorite guilty pleasure? What do you do just for yourself?
All right. It's kind of a strange question.
That's exactly right. That's what makes it so perfect.
Yeah. So I can drink iced tea all day long. I can have, you talk about people drinking like, a whole gallon of coffee. I could drink gallons of iced tea all day long, which of course is not good for me. But that would be, that's something it's not a bowl of ice cream. It's not, I'm not skydiving, nothing like that. But if I have just, 1 cup of iced tea with lots of ice and lots of agave sugar,
I was going to ask you if it was sweet.
Oh man. It
make
is
your
sweet.
teeth sweat.
Yeah. So I could do that all day long. And then it's not just my wife yanking me back. Then it's my doctor pulling me by my back. You had better stop this. Keep your blood pressure up. With all the caffeine.
I love it. You know what? Barry, you have been such a blessing to us today. Thank you so much for giving so much of yourself and sharing so much of your story, because you really talk about the hard stuff that people are uncomfortable talking about. And that's something I think that's so important, because we can all relate.
Well, thank you, Natalie. I really appreciate it. And thank you, JJ. And this has been, we're talking about some difficult things, but this is fun. Especially, I got to say, because I'm not in the middle of it, it's so much easier to talk about it. In the middle of it, just as you were saying, it's like I'm feeling the walls closing in, and I don't have that perspective. It's taken a long time to get the perspective, and not just talk about how difficult it is, but also realize that I did some good things. I mean, it's not all just like one big morass of guilt. It was hard, but I'm really glad to have done it, which is mostly what caregivers say at the end of the day. They look back and they say, this was really hard, but pat on the back, I did the best I could, and I'm glad that I did it, and I learned a lot from it, and I certainly learned a lot from the years that I did this.
Man, you can't wrap this up any better. Okay,
thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for listening. And check out Barry's articles and his books. We'll have everything in the show notes for you. Check it out. You will be blessed by it. Guys, thank you so much. And until we confess again, we'll see you next time. Well, friends, that's a wrap on this week's confession. Again, thank you so much for listening. But before you go, please take a moment to leave us a review and tell your friends about the Confessions podcast. Don't forget to visit our website to sign up for our newsletter. You'll also find a video recording of all of our episodes on the Confessions website and our YouTube channel. Don't worry, all the details are included in the show notes below. We'll see you next Tuesday when we come together to confess again. Till then, take care of you. Okay, let's talk disclaimers. You may be surprised to find out, but we are not medical professionals and are not providing any medical advice. If you have any medical questions, we recommend that you talk with a medical professional of your choice. As always, my sisters and I at Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver have taken care in selecting the speakers, but the opinions of our speakers are theirs alone. The views and opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the express written consent of the Sisterhood of Care, LLC. Thank you for listening to the Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver podcast.